So I am Peter Smallage. I'm the New York State Extension Forester, and I run the Cornell's Forest Connect program. And we include, as part of that program, a monthly series of webinars where we bring in people doing very cool stuff. And today we have the pleasure of being joined by Tom Worthley. Tom's a friend and colleague from the University of Connecticut. He's the Extension Forester, and he offered to talk about an adaptive silviculture for climate change site that he and others are involved with. So, Tom, welcome. And I will, if you, I've made you co-host, I think you can go ahead and share if you want, and then you can just jump right into it.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Hopefully you can hear me okay.
Yes, perfect sound.
All right, now let's see. And hopefully you'll see a slide that opens up with the initials ASCC. Southern New England Oak Resistance, Resilience, and Transition Treatments. Are you seeing that okay?
Not yet.
As I shared the screen, let's see. Let me come back to this. Just share screen. Oh, I see. There was an extra step that I missed. Okay. All right. Now do you see that?
There we go. There we go.
Okay.
You're in, there you go.
Now we're in the presentation
You
mode.
are
Okay.
right where you're supposed to be. We are good to
Okay.
go. Good. Thank
Awesome.
you. Thank
Well,
you.
this is
Welcome, Tom.
this is the title slide, and I'm sorry for the mix up here. It was a way our system connects with Zoom somehow that I wasn't prepared to have to deal with. So, the Adaptive Silviculture for Climate Change Network is a continent-wide series of experiments involving a variety of sites around around North America. It started out with 4 sites in the United States, looking at different forest types, and has expanded to sites in the South and sites in Canada, and has become quite a an endeavor. And the notion is to experiment with different silvicultural treatments, different silvicultural systems in a variety of forest types and in a variety of climate settings, to find out whether there are systems and treatments that will assist various forest types to either resist the anticipated changes associated with climate change, to be resilient in the face of those sorts of changes, or to transition to something a little different, given anticipated changes. For example, in our part of the world, we expect to have more precipitation, earlier springs and later winters, and less snowpack, and so forth and so on. And so if we wanted to transition to a different climate type in that nature, what kind of thing might we try? If we want our stand to be able to continue to thrive and be healthy, and provide all the various benefits and services that the stand provides, even if changes come along, what might that be? That would be a resilient type of approach. And if we wanted to sort of maintain the status quo and resist the changes associated with climate, what might we do? And the network was well on its way, and I was reading some literature about it, and thought to myself, well, this is great. This is a wonderful idea. This is very interesting. They don't have the oak and hickory type represented, and they don't have a landscape like we live in southern New England, which is very parcelized and very fragmented, represented. But these principles might apply to our region as well. And so I proposed a experiment on a smaller acreage arrangement, and proposed some treatments and so forth, so on, that would be doable in our part of the world, and that would fit in with the type of activities that people do in private lands, forest management around southern New England. And as it happens, we managed to set up 3 replicate sites in Connecticut and Rhode Island. Number of people involved in various ways, and we are following the same protocols that the initial experiment called for. They wanted 25-acre size stands with 25-acre treatments, 3 different treatments and a control, which would involve 100 acres. They wanted 4 replications, so they needed 400 acres of the same forest type and the same setting, and in order to be involved in their experiment. And I had a hard time finding that kind of size, so we proposed something a little bit smaller. So they consider our site to be an affiliate site because we're looking at 7 to 10 acre treatments instead of 25-acre treatments, and replicating our experiment in different parts of the landscape instead of all together. So a couple of words to begin with in terms of how I'm approaching this particular presentation.
Tom,
yes.
let me interrupt. There looks like there's a dialog box in the bottom of your screen that says app.zoom.
I should
Click hide.
Click hide. Sorry,
Perfect. Nope.
I
Perfect.
wasn't
Thank
even
you.
noticing that.
That's good.
Okay. The there's a couple of points that I want to make, and to those of you who are in the professional forestry world, this is old news. This is repeat. For those of you who are relatively new to how we develop silvicultural prescriptions, this is one of the things I want to emphasize here, and we'll be going stepwise, and it's really a way to get us to think about it. But to begin with respect to adaptive silviculture for climate change. After all of the arguments and all is said and done, and all of the nuances are taken away, I see 3 things that we can influence with silviculture in the forestry world, whether you're talking about 5 acres or whether you're talking about 500 acres. We can impact forest resiliency through species mix, age class, and structural diversity. That's something that we can influence using silvicultural practices, and something that will be important moving forward. If the forest is expected by the general public to do the job of helping to mitigate climate change through sequestering carbon, it needs to be a healthy, productive forest. The trees need to be growing, and that's something we can impact. We can also impact the rate of carbon sequestration through the proper implementation of intermediate treatments. We can get the carbon sequestration rate to increase. We can get the trees to grow faster. Okay. And then finally, we can choose on our own woodlot or on our public lands to allocate any of that carbon that's sequestered from the atmosphere to trees that have the greatest long-term carbon storage potential. The greatest long-term carbon storage potential. Now, what that means is we can carry those trees for as long as they'll live and grow them into great big trees as long as they continue to keep growing, and they will store the carbon. We could also think of that in terms of growing the most valuable tree that would become a durable, valuable wood product that would store carbon for a long, long time. And consider that to be a tree with great carbon storage potential. And so whether somebody harvests the tree or not, well, that's not my job. My job is to grow the best tree I can, the best trees I can in all the places I can for as long as I can. And that would do the job. The other thing I want to address is this term of goals and objectives. Forest management is the long game. I have this photograph here of a really sad looking stand with lots of beech and beech leaf disease and beech bark disease. And that's not what I want to be growing. I want to be growing oak and hickory trees at that site, let's say. And so my goal there is I want to grow oak and hickory trees. My objective is more short term, measurable, something that's doable. What do I need to make that look like tomorrow in order to grow oak and hickory trees 5, 20, or 50 years from now? What conditions are we creating with our silvicultural treatment? That's the way I want to talk about this, the way I like to think about it. Getting back to our experimental site, as luck would have it, we conceived of this idea of getting involved in the Adaptive Silviculture for Climate Change Network just about the same time that the state of Connecticut at Mohegan State Forest was considering doing a salvage harvest of standing dead oak trees that were affected by the spongy moth infestation beginning in 2018. And they were aware that they had this massive mortality event throughout large parts of eastern Connecticut, and were busily making plans to do salvage harvesting. Not all the oak trees died, but significant numbers of them did. And so various parts of the stands were more heavily impacted by mortality than others. And we happened along and said, gee, could we work with you on developing an operational plan that would incorporate our ideas for developing some resistance, resilience, and transition treatments. And they allocated this area associated with stand number 411 at Mohegan State Forest to set up our experiment. And a closer look at that shows how we broke the site out into approximately 8-acre areas. The blue one is associated with resistance treatments. The green one is associated with a resilience operational plan. And the orange area was the area most heavily impacted by spongy moth with the greatest amount of mortality. And we chose that area for our transitional treatment. Following the, let me back up a little bit. Here's a quick look at the inventory we had for the stand. Something like 20 prism plots across the whole area. And this is a stand table. For those of you who aren't aware of what that means, it refers to the number of trees per acre. Species listed across the top, diameters down the left-hand side, and this is what the inventory showed us was there on the average across that stand. This includes the standing dead material. If I plot that data, we get a pretty typical reverse J-shaped curve that you would find in an even age stratified mixture, meaning all the trees are about the same age, but there's a wide range of large and small diameter stems because in that stratification, we have quite a number of species that are shade tolerant, slow growing, represent a sub-canopy below the main oak and hickory canopy. We can also look at basal area per acre in the same way, arrayed in a table, but the shape of that table would look pretty much the same. 118 square feet of basal area per acre. Basal area being defined as the cross-sectional area of the stem of a tree measured at 4.5 feet above the ground. It's kind of a neat metric because it's an area to area comparison or ratio, square feet of basal area to the acre, and kind of let you know how many square feet of that acre are actually covered by tree trunks, if you will. So we can plot that data as well. The curve, if you plot it all out on each different color here, represents a different species, and then the heavy green line represents the total, is different than the plot we had for the numbers of trees, and that's because those very small diameter stems don't contribute much in terms of the basal area. It's the larger stems that do. So broken down by species, basal area per acre. For those of you who are interested, we see that it is mostly an oak stand with a good representation by red maple. What else? We all have that, and hickory. And this red line penciled in is a representation of what I thought the curve would look like with the mortality taken out. Okay, just so you know what that reference is. Take the dead trees out. This is what we would have left, and the basal area in the same way. And so if we look at our stocking guide, our original inventory showed a stand of trees that was generally overstocked or close to being overstocked at 174 trees per acre and 118 square feet of basal area. And if we take out the mortality, we're back down around closer, a little over 100 square feet per acre, and a little over 150 trees per acre. Following the protocols of the ASCC experiment, we held a workshop, and the workshop was attended by forest managers, state personnel, scientists, a couple of landowners, people that are actively practicing forestry. We shared with them the inventory information. We took them for a walk on the property. We explained the problems associated with the mortality. We shared with them that the state was planning to do this salvage, and that our long-term goals were in the experimental site were to regenerate the site, but do it in such a way. In one instance would be resisting climate change, in one way to build in some resilience to climate change, and in one way regenerating that stand in a way that transitions to something a little bit different. They gave us their thoughts on all of this. We took that information and processed it. We have a graduate student working on looking at the human dimensions aspect of all of this, and that'll be coming out as information as well, and began to develop some silvicultural prescriptions. So these are just some graphics that came out of the workshop. There'll be this could be a whole webinar in itself, and I won't go into it in too much detail because Amanda's working on her dissertation with this information. But getting back to the idea of developing silvicultural prescription, here the recommendations for our resistance area was to maintain this oak hickory dominance and regenerate the stand so that it would still have that oak and hickory component, but to keep all of the species that are represented in some way. Maintain a range of diameter classes. And we interpreted that as, and in fact, they suggested that sort of a traditional shelter wood preparation cut might be the way to go. They wanted, of course, to salvage what was dead, protect some reserves, any unique habitats that we might find. But our goal was to create a stand that had 110 trees per acre instead of this 174, with maybe around 80 square feet of basal area per acre instead of that 100 that we might have seen. So we look at these graphs again, and if I take the dead stuff out, and I look at my stocking chart, I'd be creating a stand that appears about where this resistance blue spot is on the stocking guide. Lower down in the fully stocked range, still fully stocked, but with lower density and a little bit higher average tree diameter and a little fewer trees, redistributing the growing potential of the site to better trees and making some room to begin the regeneration process. Looking at the graphs, that stand I want to create might look something like this when I would be done. Under the shaded blue area would be what I would still have. Trees in the range of 4 to 22 inches in diameter, with the bulk of them in the smaller diameter ranges, pole size ranges, small saw timber ranges. So looking at my stand table, I'm not going to hang on to too many really small stems, and I'm going to harvest some of the largest stems. I'm going to find 110 square feet of basal area somewhere within this block. I'm going to, when I finally walk out into the stand with my paint gun, I'm going to look at this range of sizes and species as these are the trees I want to keep. These are the trees I want to grow. I'm only going to remove those ones that don't have a promise for the future. Same with looking at it from a basal area standpoint. The actual harvesting operation that was done at this site was conducted with a mechanical system. We had a feller buncher with a circular saw head, and that would harvest the trees, lay them in bunches, and then a grapple skidder came and picked up those bunches and brought the whole tree to the landing. And then the trees were, those whole trees were cut to length, once again through mechanical means, and sorted at the landing into various products. They had a few high-grade logs, quite a few medium-grade saw logs, quite a bit of firewood from this salvage operation. And as a result, because of the standing trees, the mechanical operation was kind of required just from a safety standpoint. But as a result, we didn't always get the treatment of smaller diameter stems that we might have considered. The grapple skidder would bring unmarketable material, the tops, the branches, and so forth and so on, back out to the site and spread it around, believe it or not. And so a lot of the skid paths were covered up with this slash carpet, which was kind of nice, and has really done a great job in terms of protecting oak regeneration as we go along. So here's our resistance treatment that you'll see again, the target or the desired stand conditions that we were looking to create in the blue shaded color. When we actually inventoried the site after we got done, it looked a little bit more like this. And so we were almost there from a numbers standpoint, but we don't have necessarily all of the diameters represented that we were hoping to, but we do have a pretty good species mix in terms of what the recommendations called for. In the resilience area, we had a little bit more of the mortality in clumps. And so we had these canopy gaps already started. And so we were looking to create conditions that would develop a sort of a multi-cohort structure, get patches of regeneration started in these openings, carry some areas of unbroken canopy in between them, and then plant a few trees that might be novel. The group we had in the workshop was very interested in hybrid American chestnut that might be blight resistant, and thought we should be introducing some of that back into this ecosystem. And the recommendations they suggested was that overall, in a arrangement, in a spatial arrangement that was gaps interspersed by relatively unbroken canopy, that our average should be around 90 trees per acre, 70 square feet of basal area, with an average diameter of 11 to 12 inches. So we would be growing wood on pretty good trees, and still creating some light that would favor trees that will regenerate where there is more light. And if we look at the stalking chart, that brings us down close to the C line. I mean, to the B line is what I mean to say. And the green dot here is what our desired condition would have been. If I look at my table of data, we have a square here outlining the diameter ranges and the species that we have to work with. We're going to try to find 90 trees per acre from this group. Now, there's 105 within this red square, 174, remember, per acre altogether, 105 within this square. And so we're only looking at maybe 15 trees per acre that we're going to take out. And at that consideration, I might be thinking more about species rather than diameter in terms of what I want to keep. I might remove 15 trees per acre from the red maple category, for example, if I don't want to grow those, and I would rather devote the growing space to oak and hickory. Once again, the basal area is going to be reduced down to about 70 within that range of diameters and across those species. After we take out the biggest and remove some of the smallest trees in those openings, don't let me brush over that. Where we want openings, not just in the upper canopy, but we have to also remove that subcanopy shade. This means all the little beeches and all the little ironwoods and all the little red maples need to come out of the stand as well. And so in those openings, and so that those are going to have to be removed. But within the diameter ranges and species that I think I might want to work with in terms of moving forward, I'm going to find 70 square feet of basal area to work with there. Once again, perhaps extracting most of it from the red maple category or some other species that I don't want to work with, or undesirable growing stock from any species. And the picture, the graphical picture of my stand inventory might look something like this in the green shaded areas on these graphs. When we get done, we have a nicely arranged stand of oak and hickory growing stock in the small and medium saw timber size that's going to continue to grow. You might be able to see in this right-hand photograph the edge of one of our canopy gaps that will be letting some light into the stand. The left-hand photograph shows how dense that subcanopy condition was in this area, and we tried to get rid of most of it. In the end, after the mechanical treatment, our inventory looks something like this. And as you can see, we were less successful than I expected to removing the smaller stems. So this might be some follow-up work that we need to do with by hand, just to keep that subcanopy shade where it needs to be, minimize that subcanopy shade in order to foster our oak and hickory regeneration. We have some photographs of students, walking through the area during the reevaluation process, and they've been participating all along the way. We've had undergrad and graduate students on this project right from the beginning. The transition area was the area, as I said, that had the most oak mortality. And we had quite a bit of advanced regeneration in this area, more so than in the other areas, although there was some existing in all of those areas, but quite a bit of oak seedlings already established. Some were relatively new seedlings from an acorn year we had in 2016. Some of those seedlings have been around since the mid-90s. They're 20-something years old, and they've just been languishing there, browsed by the deer and shaded by the subcanopy, and just needing more light in order to develop. Well, now they're going to get some more light. The spongy moth came along, killed a bunch of trees, made some very large canopy gaps in this part of the stand, and so that would be salvaged. We would work with those openings, remove the subcanopy shade, and promote the existing regeneration. And then in this particular stand, we would also embark on a planting program that included more of that blight-resistant chestnut and some other species that might be native to our area, but not apparent in this stand. Tulip poplar, for example, would be a good one. In full sunlight, we would have places that we could put black walnut. Maybe some of the southern origin oaks might be suitable planting sites. We have planted some chestnut out there. We're encouraging some naturally seeded tulip at that site, but I haven't planted any walnut out there yet, but hopefully we'll get to do that this summer. Our target was to get it down below the sea line on the stocking chart, and somewhere around 50 square feet of basal area and fewer than 50 trees per acre. Once again, the standing growing stock, the reserves, if you will be in clumps with large openings in between. And in addition to the natural regeneration, we would be doing a planting program. In these charts, you notice that I have used the words post-harvest objective. Remember how I defined earlier in the talk about the word goal. My goal here is to regenerate the stand in a way that will transition it to be appropriate for the climate changes we anticipate. My objective is this immediate condition I'm trying to create. And that's that, 40 trees per acre and 50 square feet of basal area. So that's my desired condition. And I'm going to work with a narrower range of diameter classes and a narrower picture with respect to species in terms of what I want to grow there. And so everything else is going to go except for some of the trees within this box. We're going to pick out 40 trees per acre within this box and 50 square feet of basal area from within this box. When we walk out there with our paint gun, those are the trees we're going to look for that we want to keep, and then everything else goes, and we'll have achieved our objective, our immediate objective of what it needs to be in order to achieve those long-term goals. In the end, if you consider this small shaded area that's shaded in orange as being what our desired condition would be, this is kind of what it looked like on the ground. And lots and lots of woody material, lots and lots of open canopy, but some very nice oak trees still alive, still standing to provide seed, to be reserves, and to provide other services as well. And we have great planting capabilities in almost full sunlight conditions. Where we had unusual species like a remnant red cedar or the occasional hemlock tree or something like that, we would keep those. We wouldn't remove them because they make it for an interesting biodiversity. We did have tours of the site with various groups and lab groups and so forth and so on, looking at various times. When we actually got done with the harvest, we had this same situation. Still a few more of the smaller stems than I would like to have in that area, and we will have a follow-up to make sure that um, ironwood, beech, red maple, things like that are dropped on the ground and not creating shade conditions where I want to be regenerating chestnut or walnut or oak or something like that. So as in terms of following up, we have a permanent plots fixed out there with a sampling protocol that's defined by the larger network. We'll be returning there this summer to collect data on all of those plots and put it in the archives for analysis later on. These sites do get a lot of attention from us. We have a site that's been established where treatment's been accomplished over there in Rhode Island at Hillsdale State Forest. Quite a bit of oak mortality there. Rhode Island was very, very hard hit. And so the salvage work there was hardly paid for actually getting the operation done. We have another site picked out on Yukon Forest in Coventry, Connecticut, where we'll be establishing very similar treatments to the one that was done at Mohegan State Forest. This is an area that has some pockets of hemlock, and other softwoods. We have a vernal pool in the middle of it that won't be part of the experiment, but it's very typical of the landscape, in our part of the world. And so we've had a workshop where we had some professionals in. I've had students look at this as part of their forest management class. And so we have all kinds of information about this property and are ready to go this summer in terms of getting treatment done. So we've had tours with professional groups, with state forest groups. We've had representatives from state agencies from all over the region. We've had landowners out here. We've had all kinds of folks talking about climate implications, oak regeneration implications. And in this photograph on the right-hand side, a lot of people have taken interest in our deciding to plant some chestnut. This was a chestnut seedling we planted, and we put a little protection device around it to keep it from getting browsed by the deer in the very first year of its growth. And it outgrew the little protection device in the very first growing season. You can see how it's grown over the top. So we have designed larger protection cones for the trees that we want to protect, and hopefully we'll keep them from getting browsed too heavily until they're tall enough to not be of interest to the deer anymore. And it's been an interesting project, multifaceted. I make the joke about, you're getting old when you get down on the floor to do something and you say to yourself, is there anything else I can do while I'm down here? And it's an example of multitasking. And this is something we've certainly accomplished with this project in terms of involving students, involving various types of research and engaging the public. And so we've had some very positive attention and are looking forward to where we can go with it moving forward. And so I thank you. And I've tried to leave a little time if there's any questions. And hopefully it wasn't too wonky and too data laden. But if we think about the conditions we want to create, then what we need to cut reveals itself, and we can keep our focus where it needs to be in order to achieve the conditions that we want and eventually those long-term objectives that we're aiming for. And so with that, I thank you very much. And I will escape from this and stop sharing my screen if I can.
Tom, that was a great presentation. Thank you. Let me
Well, thank you.
reposition some of my screen here so I can see questions. So there are some questions that are coming in, but as the host, I'm going to exercise my option for first questions. So I've got actually a page of them. So I'll just do a couple, and then
Okay.
other people will probably, and I'll cycle back through. So this is
Okay.
just for everybody that's listening. Feel free to type in your questions. Make sure you send them to everyone so that everybody can see the questions. Then when Tom's going through and responding, it'll make it easier so people will know what we're talking about. I'll scroll to the top, or either I or Tom will scroll to the top, and we'll work down through to make sure we get all those. So I'm especially interested in the planting process. And that's because we're going to have an area, our research forest, where we need to do some augmented planting or whatever you want to call it, enrichment planting. So how did you pick locations? So I guess it's pretty obvious in the transition area, you had these big openings. In other areas, were you just looking mostly for gaps, canopy gaps where you planted, or was there a pattern to your planting? Did you mark the seedlings? How did all of the seedlings receive some kind of a cage or material to protect them from deer? So just if you could lay that out a little bit, please.
Okay. The planting was not done by any kind of pattern or grid. To answer your first question, we mostly looked for gaps. And what has been planted so far is that hybrid chestnut and also some pure American chestnuts as well. And all of those were protected by some kind of plastic cone. This all needs to be repeated because because they outgrew the cones. But that was not something I anticipated. The rest of the planting is still in the planning stages, and in terms, and it's going to be determined by what we have access to plant, and there won't be any planting done in the resistance area. We're going to rely on natural regeneration for that. The planting will be limited to the gap areas, the large gap areas. And I think we're going to stick primarily to the chestnut in our resilience area. It's in the transition area that we're going to be planting other species. And much of that will depend, the pattern, if you will depend on where the gaps are, plus how successful we are with the advanced regeneration that we already have. Since I would like to favor oak and hickory at these sites, it's I don't want to compete with those. But where this transition site gets to be a little bit more moisture, why bringing in some tulip would be very appropriate. And in places where we don't have great oak and hickory advanced regeneration or regeneration coming along, we may supplement that with black walnut or something else. So hopefully that answers your question.
Yes. And just a quick follow-up, and well, two, because there's a link. So do you have a target number of seedlings, either planted or total, that you're trying to achieve?
Good question. No, but I think what I would do is I would look for number of stems per acre, desirable stems per acre. I have a little oak regeneration study in another location where I have, upwards of 600 oak seedlings per acre. And I know when they get to be mature trees, I'm only going to need maybe 60 of them. But if I could get 600 stems per acre of desirable regeneration of any of a number of desirable species, I guess I would back out of there. If I'm only looking at 400 stems per acre, why I might supplement with another 200 per acre kind of
Sure.
thing. Yeah.
Okay. And then I saw Jessica asked a question a little bit more recently. Did you work with the American Chestnut Foundation to get the hybrid chestnuts, or how did you source those?
We worked with the American Chestnut Foundation,
Okay, great.
and we have a good local chairperson who was very cooperative.
Okay, great. So, Tom, do you want me to read the questions or do
Yeah,
you?
if you don't
Okay,
mind.
sure. No, I'm happy to. I just whatever's easiest for you. So I've scrolled back to the top and I'm now moving forward and looking for questions. So Zoe wants to know, how do you prevent invasives from taking over after you open up the canopy?
Good question. And I'm sorry I didn't mention that earlier. The state forestry division, because it's their land, has a policy of treating any invasives that exist before they do any harvesting. So they had an invasive shrub control contractor in there doing invasives treatment before harvesting started. And if anything comes back, why we'll just spot treat it as it happens.
Okay. So the questions jump around as people add them to the list. Uh, so James wants to know, and I did not plant this question, wants to know if you had considered slash balls.
Well, not at this particular site. One because it was a state contract with the contractor, and they weren't going to incorporate that. One of the things that we are playing with, and to use the housing analogy a little bit further, is slash carpets, and so we are looking into spreading slash around after post-harvest slash. And there's another site altogether where we're looking at creating a slash carpet by doing the sub canopy treatment first before we open up the upper canopy, and doing some deer browse protection using slash carpets that last. Maybe we get 3 or 4 years where the little oak seedlings get a chance to express some height, before we come in and open up the canopy and let in some light. So it was a discussion. So yes, we did consider it, but it wasn't actually applied at this particular location.
Okay. Um, Nia wants to know about markets for the small diameter pole size timber. Do you have markets for those or?
Well, I believe the contractor had a fuel wood market. They were a general logging contractor with markets that sent their materials to, various mills and various markets. And I believe they had one of these processing and bundling, dry kilning firewood operations that
Hmm,
they sold that uh, smaller material to.
okay. Alan wants to know how you or if you or kind of the prospect of incoming pests and disease that might be associated with climate changes in climate, and if that factored into your selection of species for planting.
Um, I think it. Uh, I think it would to some degree, but uh, I think in terms of what to plant is going to be more about the soil and the site and the aspect and the moisture availability and those sorts of things. Is it appropriate site to plant tulip trees? Is it an appropriate site to plant black walnut or hickory trees, as the case may be? Whether some pest comes along, the idea of creating a variety in terms of a diversity, if you will, of species is what's intended to mitigate that issue. If something comes along and attacks the hickory trees, well, hopefully we'll have some other things around that will take their place.
Sorry, gotta unmute, don't I? So Teresa likes this description from an oak hickory's perspective, and she wants to know Think about how it might be applied in a black cherry, northern hardwood stands, patch cuts and basal area, similar kinds of basal area reductions to a residual of 50 square feet. Any specific thoughts on adapting this project to a predominantly black cherry stand?
I would begin by looking at a website that the Forest Service has called the Climate Change Tree Atlas. Okay, and it will it's self-explanatory. You have to read the instructional information, but it will give you some idea about what the vulnerability is for various species, or um, favorability, on the other hand, of various species at different locations, looking into the future. But one of the important links they have, uh, when you click on a particular species, one of the links you can find is something they highlight as the Silvix Manual. This is a link to a publication called the Silvix of North America that gives you all the details we know about every species that grows in North America in terms of what its life history is, what its uh, ecological characteristics are in terms of its shade tolerance, how long it lives, what other species it associates with, what soil types that it is found on. And if you have that information and you know how the different species will interact with each other as a stand, then you can develop some ideas around what's a desired condition to grow these particular trees, and uh, and then develop your silviculture prescriptions from there. We'd have to look at the what you have to work with. That's why you do this inventory. What do I have to work with? What do I want it to be? Okay. If it's not what I want it to be, then what do I have to do to change it? So this is, I know that's a very general answer to the question, but um, that's the best I can do at this point in time.
So I'm assuming there's also maybe some guidance that might be available through the network, the Adaptive Silviculture Network, in addition.
Well,
So,
yeah, and there'll be links to a group called NIAX, which is also a Forest Service uh, wing that has done vulnerability assessments for the forests, and has all kinds of publications providing guidance and for various forest types. And it's a lot of homework to dig into all of that stuff, but it's very well done, and um, very reliable information.
okay. Tim wants to know if you have thoughts on using fire as a tool to control the smaller stems, the understory, maybe some of the slash.
Yes. Um, Fire was at one time a regular component of the ecosystem in these areas. Upland fires were quite common before European settlers came along, and even after that, to some degree, and therefore, um, those historical forests did not have the same numbers of stems of beech. They didn't have the same numbers of black birch. They didn't have the same numbers of red maple or ironwood, because fire would have an impact on these thin bark species. And while all those species were present, they just weren't present in the same numbers. And so fire controlled burning is a consideration where you can pull it off. In this case, the state was not able to work that into the plan, but the state does use fire in some places for that very reason. And I'd be less inclined to use it to control slash. I would rather have the slash on the ground. Keep the deer feet tangled up, and um, keep them from browsing some trees that are hard to reach for them. And so, but in terms of controlling ironwood and beech and stuff like that, yeah, I would love to be able to do a controlled burn.
Okay. Um, Another different Tim wants says he has pure American chestnut in an open field that's growing well. Question kind of got truncated. I think it's like, how did the American chestnut do in the shelterwood setting? So you described the the first year growth out of the cone suggests
Yeah.
that worked pretty well.
Yeah. And that particular photograph was in the resilience area, so it wasn't getting full sunlight, but it was getting um, adequate sunlight. And I think they'll do very well if they don't get the blight. And that's something that we'll see over the next couple of years. And that's the reason for planting them out, is to see how they do in that sort of uncontrolled setting, if you will. And we promise to protect them from deer browse, and we will continue to do that. But if the blight comes along, then we'll see how they perform. But if you have one that's doing well in full sunlight, and it begins to produce nuts and stuff, why the American Chestnut Foundation might want to know about it.
Okay. Jessica wants to know if you have any suggestions on restoring stands with a high density of dead pitch pine from southern pine beetle. Salvage is not an option. Burning is. They've built fire breaks, looking for next steps to restore the pine barrens.
Well, if there's any live pitch pines and you do a burn in there, you might see some regeneration. If there's any live pitch pines with cones still up in the crown, you might a fire might just open those cones and scatter some seed. If you do a fire and you don't get pitch pine regeneration, you might get white pine. At the very least, you'll get all of the fire adapted hardwoods. You'll get cherries, you'll get some oaks, and that sort of thing. But if you don't do a fire, then you might be able to mimic some of those conditions, and create something that's kind of like what a fire would produce in terms of getting everything on the ground, except for the bigger trees that would have been resistance to the fire.
Okay. Just a side note, John had asked about references or links, and Nia provided some of those. Thank you, Nia. Ron says, what's your thought about the need for increasing species diversity and decreasing dominance of one or two genera in the resilience and transition treatments?
Well, going back to my previous comment about how historically, while we had maple and birch and beech in the forest, we didn't historically have them in the high numbers that we have now. And so while we didn't eliminate maple, birch, and beech altogether in our resilience area, we reduced the numbers, and with the idea of favoring that oak and hickory type. And there's a couple reasons that I'm interested in doing that. First of all, oak trees are hugely valuable from a habitat standpoint, and not only today, but also moving forward. 50 years from now, people are going to be interested in 50-year-old oak trees, that are producing acorns for a variety of wildlife species, and also sites for insects and so forth and so on. Also, those are fast-growing hardwood trees, and if you look at the stand we started with as an even-aged, stratified mixture, and you see that we have these great big huge trees that are the main canopy, and then we have a bunch of smaller trees that are shade tolerant, slower growing. You can see the trees that grew the fastest were the oaks and the hickories. And if we want to sequester carbon, if we want to affect the rate of carbon sequestration, we need trees that will grow faster. They'll gain height quickly, they'll spread their crowns, they'll express dominance, and they'll add wood at a much more rapid rate than a maple tree or a black birch tree will. There's nothing wrong with maple and birch. Don't get me wrong. It's just that if these are the jobs we want these trees to do, provide mass for wildlife and sequester carbon, then these are the trees we need to grow. My colleague Frank Servo, here, one of the service foresters in Connecticut, has coined the term. You can or the phrase, um, if you manage for oak, you'll still get birch and beech and maple. If you don't manage for oak, then all you're going to get is birch and beech and maple. So we don't necessarily try to eliminate them all. We just want to reduce the numbers.
Good point. Okay, so Jessica says, any idea on where to get historical information on beech distribution, pre-colonial, and how its distribution has been impacted by human actions?
Oh, I would. Um,
I was thinking there's likely some old, like early 1900s kind of forest history articles or experiment
yes,
station kinds of publications that might have some resources and information.
yeah, and there was a author, a researcher, an ecologist some years ago that did an analysis. His name was Cogbill, Cogbill, and what he did was research historical records on survey trees that were witness trees
Ah, yes.
described in surveys, and made some conclusions about the distribution of different species across the landscape. And so I forget the gentleman's first name,
Charlie.
but
Charlie
yeah,
Cog.
Charlie
Yeah.
Cogbill. Look up his work. I think that would be a great reference.
Yeah. Lou Ward suggested Lucy Braun, who was also a mid 1900s forest ecologist. She had a kind of a classic book that is not in my brain right now, but
Yeah.
Lucy Braun's a great resource. So,
Yeah.
and some other, I think that I've seen some stuff out of places in New York that have experiment station, and the other states have some of these early reports on the forest, and it may be a fairly localized report, but if you looked at a few of those, you might be able to piece together some information about the abundance of beech. But by those would have been still late 1800s and had some human impact is going to be
Yeah.
reflected in that
Yeah.
probably. So,
Yeah, the interesting thing I'm observing about beech these days is that because of beech bark disease, and beech might be a victim of its own success. Beech has a tremendous number of traits that allow it to be competitive in terms of reproducing itself. Produces abundant seed. It sends up vegetative reproduction from the roots and the stump and every other darn thing. And you can hardly walk by a beech tree without it sending up sprouts from the roots. And um, beech bark disease comes along, affects a tree. What's its reaction? Produce lots of seeds, produce lots of sprouts in order to perpetuate itself. And then we get these clones of beech foliage in very dense patches throughout the understory. And there's the ripe environment for the beech leaf disease nematode to be able to spread across the landscape. And so, I think the occasional beech tree here and there, throughout the stand might have been just the way things were historically, but these days with the huge extent of some of these beech clones that we have throughout the understory is just not a natural condition, if you will.
true. Well, Tom, it looks like you have hit all of the questions. I don't think I missed any. If I did and the person's still here, please type it in. Otherwise, I just want to thank Tom. This was a really fun presentation, Tom. You guys are doing a lot of very cool stuff there. You got a lot of people involved, which makes it also, I'm sure, that much more fun and engaging. So we
Well,
appreciate you
well, it's
sharing your experiences.
Well, it's fun to talk about, and hopefully we'll, as regional and national meetings come our way, we'll be able to take people to these sites and show them around and, get a lot more mileage out of it. But I thank you very much for inviting me. And, it's been fun to talk about.
Yes. Well, we'll have Tom back again tonight at 7 if anybody wants to see this presentation again. I gotta warn you, usually the evening session's pretty close to the noon session, so not a lot of new stuff, folks, but as it should be. Get a different audience. So, Tom, thank you. Enjoy your
Okay.
afternoon. Thanks to the participants, and take care, everybody.
Y'all have a good day.